Hello, 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 hello. Hey guys, it's me again. Good afternoon. This is Manolo, and today we're going to be talking about flight navigation and flight planning. Um, this is also part of the section 2 of the instructor PTS under the technical subject area, and it's task G. Task G. So make sure that with you guys. Um, there you have it, task G. My usual disclaimer, these lessons prepared to um, are prepared to allow me to do practices, to practice my teaching during in preparation for my CFI check ride. So, and also I'm sharing this content with my instructor and fellows CFI candidate. This is not intended for either fly or ground instructions, and don't use it for these purposes. Some of the concepts I'm still working them, they might be wrong. So this is one of the reasons I want to kind of go over this, because I want to be sure that I'm saying the right things based on my notes and all that. If you need ground instructions, remember, get a certified flight instructor, ground instructor. With that said, today we're going to be talking about Task G, as I said. So you should, at the end of this lesson, the objective is that you acquire all the knowledge related with the elements, with the following elements we're going to cover. And I kind of switch to, first we're going to talk about type of navigation, pilotage, that reckoning, and radio navigation, and then we're going to talk about aeronautical charts. And then we go into flight planning. We're going to go that through an example. And then we will go, the other 4 topics are more about discussion about the importance of weather and how they impact our go, no-go decision. And then we'll talk about filing the flight plan, diversion to an alternate in case that we cannot make it or we have an emergency, and loss procedures, okay? It should take an hour. This is the first one I'm running. So let's see how it goes. Hopefully it's an hour or less. If not, I might run a new one in order to accommodate that. We will require a whiteboard, but today we're remote, so we're going to be doing this through Zoom. We need a copy of the POH. We also need a copy of, we need the sectional chart, the terminal area charts, and we need a plotter. And then if you have an E6B calculator, either the digital or the round one, we also need that. We will need a chart supplement, navigation log, and typically I have a projector and speakers, but today we're going to be doing that through Zoom. All right, so by now you should have come, I sent this lesson plan for you guys yesterday that you were familiarized. You should have read chapter 16 of the PHAC. That's where this content is. And you also should have taken a little bit of a look on the sectional and terminal charts. And let's go and do this. Okay, before we start, why we're doing this lesson? Well, people, when they do this lesson, they think this is rocket science, right? It's not rocket science. We're going to go as methodic as we can. And at the end, you should be able to figure out these. But the most important part is that you understand why we do this, right? Why we do this. And I recognize that you might move on to instrument fly and better things in life later on, but the basic knowledge of navigation and flight planning, even the commercial, are based on these same principles. Of course, they use more sophisticated technologies and instrument, but at the end of the day, he is coming from these principles we're going to be talking today. So the better you learn them, the better you will be. And so we will go over these. We will calculate a flight plan, do the nav log and all that. But as I said, right, so you eventually might be using technology like ForFly, Garmin Pilot, Sky Vectors, and things like that. But at the end, you're a PIC, you're going to be a PIC, and you need to be sure that the output of these tools is correct, right? It's going to be your responsibility. You're not going to be say, oh, it was for flight, they calculated wrong. FAA is always going to come after you because you're the PIC and you need to be sure that the tools were correct, right? That's, after all, that's what you're a PIC. And then when you progress more into your professional career, if that's what you want to do, most likely somebody's going to run this flight plan for you, a dispatcher, right? But again, you need to kind of, you're going to go on with that dispatcher, that responsibility of that flight on the Part 121. If you fly in a different place in the world, different rules and apply, but in the US, you have the co-responsibility of that flight with the dispatcher. So you need to understand and agree with the dispatcher if that flight plan makes sense, if it looks correct, and so forth, okay? Cool. Again, as I said, what we will need for today, we will need a plotter. All right, let me put this here. We need a plotter. Okay, plotter. We will need our sectional charts. Just be sure that they are valid. You don't want to be flying with uninspired charts. They change and information on the chart change. So you need to be prepared to go over, to have the most updated one. We will have the POH, I have electronically. I have an example of a deviation curve on the compass. We will go over that later. We will see if we have any NOTAMs, and then we will need a electronic flight calculator, and then and things like that, okay? Cool. All right, so the first concept I want to talk to you guys is about we have three type of navigation we have, and let me show you here quickly. Let me show you here, and with this, and we can have an example, right? All right. So the first type of navigation we call pilotage. And pilotage is none other than go from one point on the sectional chart to another point, and you keep navigating in that way until you get to the destination, right? So let's say we want to go to, Sulphur Spring, and then maybe what we'll do is we fly, we fly from McKinney to this town here, Farmersville. We follow that highway. Then we go over Greensville. We keep Highway 30 all the way, keep flying over that highway. And then until we see the town of Sulphur Spring. That will be pilotage, right? We're going from one visible waypoint to another using the sectional until we get there. Okay, cool. Then dead reckoning is a little bit of more advanced type of navigation. For that one, we're going to be using truer speed, course, heading, wind, ground speed, and time between points to see where we are and all that. Now, don't think this is only like, it's going to be only all mathematical, but ideally it should be a combination of you plot a course and you should be able to identify where you are. So it's a combination of pilotage with a more sophisticated level of technology, right? So typically you will use both. Then actually, even in that reckoning, you might start adding some help from some nav aid if needed, right? So, so the key here is that we need to do our calculations first. Then we start flying. We're going to cross-check the calculation, and we're going to be adjusting them as we fly. For example, if we arrive to the first checkpoint and we arrive faster than estimated, most likely we are probably having a stronger ground speed. So we should recalculate our flight plan and estimates based on that. Okay, so but we'll cover that later. Once that we go into the nav log, you will see what I'm meaning. Okay. And then the last one that we're not going to cover here on detail, but it's radio navigation. And radio navigation now it was based before on stations that were on the ground, and you navigate using this station. Like for example, here the sulfur spring VOR, right? Here, or you can use Bonham VOR, and then you can navigate from one to other one. This is like how the airway system was built and all that. It's probably used for IFR, but there is nothing that does, I mean, that preclude you to use these navigations to help you do VFR flight plan, right? Like for example, when I was doing my cross country, a lot of times I probably can cross check my visual checkpoint, and I was lucky that I was intersecting a radar for a VOR. Now that being said, um, as we progress in these new times, you're going to see probably less of nav8 except the VORs and ILS because everything have transitioned to GPS most likely. So probably you're going to have a combination of GPS and VORs to navigate, right? But for the purpose of this lesson, we're going to be doing everything more on the reckoning, okay? Okay, with that said, then we understand that the three types of the navigations. So all of them need something called aeronautical charts. And there are going to be two types of aeronautical charts we're going to be covering. We're going to be using. We're going to be using our sectional chart. I have an example here on the screen, right? That sectional chart is typically covers a big geographic, like this, big geographic area, and they're typically named after a city on that geographic area, right? Like this one is the DFW sectional chart, right? So you have a bunch in the country. I don't know if you can see, you can select them. They typically expire every 6 months. This one is valid until September 2020, and September 10, 2020. They are they are designed to be on a scale of we call it at 1 into 500,000, which is the same to say that 1 inch here, right, is equivalent to 6.86 nautical mile or 8 statute miles, right? So as you can see, the chart is full of information. We have things like roads, type of airspace, nav8, airport and type of airports, if they're controlled, uncontrolled. A good thing is on these charts, you will have a lot of information on the legend, and you will be able to identify most of the information on the sectional chart using that legend, right? So for example, you can come here that you have a class delta around Greenville. Also, let me make it bigger, that you see a class delta, that you have a control tower. The tower, for example, that stars means that the control tower operates part-time, is not full-time. You will have, you can also see that there is like a parachute. They do parachuting out of this airport. You have your frequency for weather. You have the airport elevation. You have the length of the longest runway at the airport. In this case, is 8,000 feet. And then you have the Unicom frequency 12295. And so then, for example, here you can see lakes, you can see railroads, you can see obstacles, right? Like antennas and so forth. And this is going to be very relevant because we're going to be using these as we navigate. So we need to get familiarized with the symbols and so forth. Okay, that's one type. Then the other type of chart that you are going to find is the what we call the terminal area chart. And let me see if I can find one here. Um, let me. I don't have one, but we can cover it later. I don't have one here. But the terminal area chart is published by the FAA for these airports where you have a lot of traffic and they want to have more clarity. Typically, it's around uh, where they have a Bravo type of airspace, right? So you will see the charts around these big cities. Is bigger and more detail. It provides more detail. Therefore, the scale is bigger. So instead of being, like 1 inch 8 station miles, it's going to be 1 inch 4 station miles, which is around three 3.4 something nauticals, right? As nautical miles. And again, they provide more information, correct? Uh, as I said, they are very important. They have a lot of information. You have, airways, as I said, you have magnetics, the aviation, private airport. You have a bunch of information here, like safe altitude, like this one, for example, in this quadrant is 1,100 feet and so forth, right? So I'm using the electronic one here that is easy for you guys to see, but I have also my paper one here, and I always carry on the airplane, the current ones, and I have it always back on my seat for whatever I'm flying, because if something happened, right, with the GPS, we have a GPS outage or whatever, or the iPad die, even though I carry two iPads and an iPhone, then you will have this will never die, right? As I said, this is, you can get it, let me show you here quickly where you can get it electronically. If you need to, besides your application, but there is a way to get it electronically. And I can provide this, I can provide you with these links. Yeah, so if you come here, let me show you. The FAA has a web page. This is a web page where you can get them and see. You see, you have your sectional, you have the terminal. They tell you, you have specifically for helicopters, flyaway, and things like that. Grand Canyon, Caribbean planning, right? And then so forth, right? So you can get these um, from here. And then you also can check when they get issued and so forth, right? So this is, you can have this document, and I will put this on the lesson, where you can see the expiration until when they're valid, right? And so forth, right? Any questions on that? Okay, cool. So let's go into flight planning a little bit. And I think for flight planning, let me switch back to my presentation. Now we can start like digging into this, which I really, really, really love. So today, for our flight, we're going to be doing a flight between McKinney, my base airport, and Paris, Texas. It is more than 50 nautical miles, which will qualify for our private pilot cross-country definition. And before of that, remember, the first thing we always have to do is get the weather, right? So in this is an abbreviated version of the weather. I typically will call the briefer, we're going to get down the weather and all that. And then in this case, I have taken the METAR for McKinney and for Paris, and I have taken out the wind aloft for 5,500, right? And so we need this, right? This is the first thing we need. And then after that, then we need to come, and what we're going to do is we're going to draw right? We're going to draw a route, right? So how we use that? We use a plotter, and I took a picture of what I have done. So you will draw a line. It has to be very dark between the points you want to follow, right? So in this case, you can see that and I will explain you that in one sec what route I selected and why, but I plot a line between McKinney and Farmersville, and then I make a straight line with the plotter between um, Farmersville all the way to Paris. Once when we do that, then the first thing we need to, before we measure the course, the first thing we need to do is measure the distance. And in this case, the plotter also has a sectional area. In this case, I'm showing it there, right? And I'm measuring the distance between McKinney and Farmersville, which is my first point, is 12 points in miles, sorry, nautical miles, and then I will keep measuring the other leg distance. Then I will show you how we're going to be doing this later on. But the first thing is you measure your distances for all the waypoints that you selected, and then second point is you're going to measure the course, right? And the course you measure it based on putting the plotter. In this case, you see putting this part of the plotter here um, parallel to the line, and then you need to find a meridian on the chart where you're going to use that as a reference in order to get your heading. So in this case, if we're going eastbound, I'm going to use the outer scale of this plotter, and you will see that the heading is somewhere around 0.58, okay? So I know I have measured my distance first, and I have measured okay, so first I do plot the line. Second, I measure distances. All right, let me repeat this again. First of all, plot the lines with selecting the waypoints I want. Then I measure distance and I measure the course. This 0.58 in this case is going to be my true course. The course between McKinney and Farmersville is around 0.89 or something like that. All right, so now before we start like getting all this together, and I know it's a little bit confusing, you will see how I start making sense in a second. Let me go quickly on why I select this route. So for that, let me change quickly to the chart again. Okay, and so here I kind of interpolate the route, right, a little bit. So the first point is, as you can see, I didn't did a straight line to Paris for one reason. And the main reason is, if you can see, if I have done a straight line, I don't know if you can see on the chart, but there were not a lot of, maybe they were, but there were not a lot of things that allow me to cross-check my navigation, right? So what I did here was, I did this for two reasons. Number one, I want to kind of demonstrate how you measure the angle into places, and also measure the distance. But I also did it because it's easier for me to fly from McKinney all the way to Farmersville. And then my idea is that I was going to follow this railroad here, right? You can see the railroad. And then I don't know why this is not. Okay, now it's working. All right, the railroad, and then I can cross-check, like for example, I will follow that railroad. I will kind of cross-check this point here and check Celeste here as well. Then I can cross-check this airport here with, Wolf City. Then if I continue, let me, if I continue, I can, check again, railroad on the left with this town, and then crossing this road, and then I get closer to Ben Franklin. I have a bunch of things there, like crossing of roads. Again, I will be very close to the railroad to the left. And that's the main reason why I choose that route, right? If I have been on the middle, I mean, we're less of, if I have flown direct, there were probably less um, um, obstacles, visual reference points that I should have used. So those are my checkpoint. I checkpoint here, this town as well. So as you can see, probably there were no more than 50 miles, which is kind of what they recommended or they recommend. And then this point here is a good point as well, because as you can see, this point is on the Bonham 083 radial. So we can use a combination of that town, Howland, plus the radial from Bonham to get this done, right? All right, so let me, and we could go back to this, but let me explain you how these start working, right? So let me recap, and now this is going to make more sense when I show you this. So as I said first, I will plot my, I plot my, um, I plot my line, right? So I plot a line between McKinney and then one to Farmersville and that railroad. And then I plot a line between Farmersville Road and Paris. As I told you, the line here, then I measure my course, right? So it was 089 between McKinney and Farmersville. And since that line didn't change, all my course between Farmersville to Paris is going to have a course of 058 as I show you on this on the plotter. Okay. Now then after I do that, then I'm going to measure distances. So I went with the plotter, right, using the proper scale, and I measured the distance between Farmersville Road, McKinney and Farmersville Road. We measured that on the presentation. I showed that to you. So that was 12 miles. And then I mark all the waypoints over my line between Farmersville and Terrace, and then I measure the distance for all these points, right? So when I do all that, I know it's going to be, and then I write all the waypoints, right? So Celeste, the road plus the railroad, that's kind of what I mentioned to you. Wall City, we have the railroad to the left, Ladonia plus road plus railroad to the left. So I put all these, and it can be lengthy a little bit, because that will help me to identify. And then, as I say, I put Howland Road and radial 083 from Bonham, right? So, and then I put all my distances as I was telling you. So, okay, so I have all the distances here. Any questions so far? Are you following me? Okay, cool. All right, so these are all my courses. I turn to 058 and then all my distances. Once that we have completed these, we have already are kind of halfway into doing our debt reckoning part. The next section we need to do now is calculate, right, the true airspeed, pressure, altitude, and so forth. But before we move, we're going to review quickly. We can start populating also where the wind is coming from, right? And for that, we got information from our trusty briefer, and they told us that the information wind aloft was going to be 160 at 12 knots, and temperature was going to be 19. And you can see it's going to be all along that route the same. So we are going to go and do that. So how we do that in the nav log? All right, we come here and fill it here. So we'll put our 160, right? And 12 and 19. So I already kind of pre-populate these. And now, and then we said that we're going to fly at 5,500. And we have that ready as well. So now we need to calculate true airspeed and so forth. And we need to calculate ground speed. We calculate true airspeed because a lot of the performance calculations are based on true airspeed. And also true airspeed is going to be different than indicated airspeed, right? So indicated airspeed is going to show what the airplane is showing, but as you fly at different altitude, temperature and pressure are going to have an impact, and that's going to change the speed, right? So that's what we need to calculate through airspeed. So let's go in order. Before we get into true airspeed, the first thing we need to calculate is pressure altitude. And how we calculate pressure altitude, and why we need to calculate pressure altitude. Well, two things. We need to calculate pressure altitude because a lot of the performance tables that Cessna uses and many of the other manufacturers are based on pressure altitude, right? Remember, the aircraft feels that they're in a different altitude based on pressure, right? And that affects performance. So we really need to understand what is the pressure altitude we're going to be flying or taking off at, what is the pressure altitude at cruise, in order that we can get the performance correctly. And also that pressure altitude is going to help us find out that true airspeed. Okay, so for that, I have an example here that we can cover, and we have done this before, right? So I put you here why we need to calculate pressure altitude, because Cessna 172 performance are based on PA. Then also we need to calculate true airspeed and ground speed. And all this is going to help us, if we have ground speed, it's going to help us calculate the fuel burn. And then the pressure altitude is also help us to calculate the climb performance based on this pressure altitude. I will show you how we do that. So here, for example, McKinney is 588 feet. The current altimeter in McKinney is 3003 inches. We got that one from the meter. And then the math is very simple. We subtract, 30.003 less 2992. And then we multiply that by 1,000, because remember, we lose 1 inch of mercury for every 1,000 feet. That gives us an adjustment of 110. And so in reality, you see we have a higher pressure, correct? So we're getting pressure over the aircraft. The aircraft is feeling that it's flying lower than the altitude that is indicated, in this case, 588. So we know that our altitude in McKinney is going to be, let's call it around 500, our pressure altitude. Then we also calculate the pressure altitude for cruise. As I told you, indicated, we expect to fly at 5,500, but we know we're not going to fly at that because there is a different pressure altitude. We're not flying at standard pressure altitude. So in this case, we do the same math. We subtract 3004 from 2992. Since the pressure is higher than standard, again, we subtract it. We can see this graph here and also use that as a helper, right? So in reality, we're not going to be flying at 5,500. We're going to be flying at 5,380, let's call it, and very close to 5,400. All right, so why we need this? Well, we need this because we're going to be using a couple of tables for climb and so forth. But so let me show this. Yeah, let me show this to begin with. So we need the pressure altitude because as I said, right? Well, let me go back. This is kind of getting, we will see this on let me finish this part first. You see our climbing altitude is going to be 79 knots. And where we get that from? All right, so let's review our operating manual for the Cessna, right? Well, hey, sorry guys, give me one sec here. Okay, sorry man, sorry guys. Okay, let's share that screen again. All right, so where we get this from? Okay, so we're going to go to our performance section, which is going to be section, I think it's 5. Yeah, 5, right? Um, and here, what we're going to do is kind of to, wish we can share this like these two screens at the same time. Okay, so you see, we're going to be climbing around 79 knots, right? So 79 knots. So you see, I can call it 80 around here, but we need to, in order to calculate the true airspeed, right? We need to have the calibrated airspeed. So, you know, we have in climbing, we're going to be climbing around 80 knots, and you can see that our 79, you can see the difference is 1 knot. So what I have done is I have reduced my indicated airspeed by 1 knot to make it the calibrated airspeed. So then how we can calculate it to airspeed? Well, let me show you here quickly how we do that. So to calculate it true airspeed, we will need, let me show you here, and then we can do this in a different way. So here. All right. So you see, this is the first reason why we need pressure altitude to, because altitude to, two, because in order to doing all this math, um, we need the calibrated airspeed and we need the pressure altitude. So if you remember, we have a pressure altitude of 480 feet, right? And the temperature outside we have in McKinney was 33 knots. And as I told you, my calibrated speed, I decided to use 78. I explained you why. So that gives us a true airspeed of 81 for climb. Now, let's do the same math now that we're here for cruise. Remember I told you for cruise, our speed was going to be 100 indicated. Remember, indicator speed is the speed that shows on the airspeed indicator. Calibrator speed is the one that is corrected by instrument error and so forth. So what we're going to do is look at the same table I saw, and when I did that, I now know that the calibrated airspeed is going to be 98 knots. From our previous example calculation, we know that we're going to be flying at 5,380. Temperature at that altitude, remember 580, the temperature is going to be 19 degree. And I told you that our 19 degree. And I told you that our calibrated airspeed is going to be 98. So as you can see, our true airspeed is going to be 109. So why all this is important? Because I need true airspeed to calculate ground speed. So I'm going through all these, you know, calculations before because I need ground speed, and I need ground speed in order to calculate fuel burn and time, or time and fuel burn. And remember, let me clarify quickly here. The airplane, when it's flying, and let's say we're with the wind, the true airspeed and the wind are the same. If we, correction, yes, the airplane doesn't feel, right, that wind, it doesn't affect, right, by the true airspeed. What is affect that, that is where the wind is coming, and then that tell you how much um, angle of wind is going to be affecting that true airspeed. So let's say we have a headwind, which is very clear. Of course, let's say we have a headwind of 10 knots and we are having a true airspeed of 100, our ground speed is going to be 90. So that's what we need to calculate this, right? I mean, it gets more complicated when you have different angles coming from different planes. But okay, so if we go quickly back, I have written, you see, I have written these elements on here. I have written these elements on um, on our presentation. So I told you that based on this, our ground speed is going to be 81, and then our airspeed on cruise is going to be 109. Now, what we do with this quickly? Well, ideally, you need to put this information on a laugh log, and then I will show you how you do that shortly. But let me calculate the ground speed quickly here. So for this example, I'm going to calculate the ground speed, uh, the ground speed for um, for my heading between Farmersville and Paris, Texas, which we know you have a true course of 58 degrees. So how we do that? Well, let me show you here quickly. Using the same computer, right? And I'll show you there's going to ways to do this. I will show you the calculator way, and then I will show you the manual way. So you see we have something called heading and ground speed. And we know that the wind is coming from the 160 at 12 knots. We know our course is 58, and we know that our speed is let's call it 109 to make it 109. So that means that our ground speed is going to be 111. You can see 2 knots more. That means that we have a little bit of tailwind. And you can see that we're going to have a wind correction angle of 6 degrees and a heading of 64. So what is happening here, and let me go quickly to for flight. You can see, let me clear all this. You will understand this if I, okay. So, okay. So this heading here that I'm highlighting, right, is 058. And the wind is coming from the 160, right? Somewhere around here, 160, 160, somewhere, let's call it like this, 160, correct? So as you can see, what is happening is if I don't do a correction of heading, what is going to happen is this wind is going to pull me that way, right? So what I need is somehow make a correction to this side that when the wind push me, I keep this heading. And that's what we call the wind correction angle. And that wind correction angle, in this case, is 6 degrees. So it's telling us that we need to add 6 degrees to the right, that when the wind hit us, we maintain our original course. Any questions on that? Okay. And then, so now how we put this on the, so we, on the logbook? Well, let's see. All right, now that I have computed all these, right, I put here my tour speed. I explained you how I calculated one climbing. And then I explained how we calculate our speed on cruise, right? For tour speed. And using the formula, I also calculate how much was going to be the ground speed. In this case, 111, 111, 111, and 111 using that calculator, okay? Now let me show you one other way you can do this. And this is more of a manual way if you're using the E6B that is manual. And it's pretty straightforward. So cool in less speed. All right, so we um, we said, right, that the wind was coming from the 160 at 160 at 12 knots. So the first thing we need to put is 160, right? There it is. And then we're going to use this thing here to put this speed. So the best practice is to put our uh, here 100, and then we set 12 knots, right? So 12 knots should be somewhere around there. Now, what we're going to do is make this. Now, this is how the wind is coming. Now we need to see how the aircraft is being affected by this. So we said that we're going to be coming, right? Heading, we're going to be flying heading 058, so somewhere around there. And then we also said, right, that we're going to be flying around 110 on our ground speed. So what we do is, you see, we move that circle to 110, and it's going to come very close. If you can see, it's going to be very close to the 112 ground speed. More importantly, now here we can count as well how many degrees of wing angle correction we need to add. So this is 2, 4, and 6. So we're getting the same answer. So we're saying the wind is coming from here, you're flying at a speed of 100 knots, then you have a little bit of tailwind, right? So that's going to affect you by 2 knots, so, or 11. And then, by the way, you need to correct to the right 2, 4, 6 degrees. So this is how you do it with the EFB, with the E6, that is, how do you call? Not the calculator one, you use the manual one. So now that we have all that, then we can complete our course, right? So we have our deviation. I did this for Farmersville, but we know the one for these headings, right? We know the 6 degree all the way because it's the same heading, right? 058, 058. We know that. And then after that, then what we need to do is add depending if this is a plus or less, we will add our course plus these two heading. So in this case, it will be 058 plus 6. Now it's going to give us a heading of 64. But now we need to consider something else. This is based on the true course, but remember, the magnetic north is not equal to the true north, and these charts are based on true north. So now we need to correct for that. And the way that we correct for that is that we need to go back to the chart and we need to look for our lines of magnetic deviation. And these lines of magnetic deviation are charted on the chart by, or depicted in the chart by this purple line dashed like this that you see here, right? This line here. As you can see, we can keep going and it's going to say 315 is, and then this one is going to be a magnetic line of 3. So let's call it 3 degrees. So where 3 degrees is. And how we adjust for that? Well, it's very easy. Just remember that if where is least, that means that we subtract any heading from, if we have a east magnetic deviation, and we're going to add any westerly magnetic deviation, right? So west is best, east is least. So in this case, we know it's 3 degrees, right? So I'm going to, in this case, if I continue with this math, I know this is 3 degrees, right? And then because it's east, I'm going to subtract it. So it has 64 minus 3. Now I'm going to have my 61. Follow me so far? Cool. Well, the last thing we need to do now is all that is perfect, but then the aircraft might have some errors due to the electrical equipment, and the compass might not be indicated correctly. So we need to count that error as well. So for that purpose, I'm going to show how one of these magnetic desviation charts look. So in the case of the Cessna, I have this one. And so here you can see if you have the Cessna, we're going to be flying like heading 058, right? 058. So it's saying, hey, if you're flying 60, which is very close, you don't really need, it's going to be closer to be flying like 59 degree. So it looks like I need to subtract 1 degree. So that's what I'm going to be doing in my nav log. So I go back to my nav log, and now I'm going to put -1, and if I subtract 61 minus 1 is going to give me my 60. That is my final heading. So to recap, I mean, I know we're going to do this more. I mean, if we're next to each other, it's easier to explain. Today, you know, I'm remote and it's kind of difficult to explain. But when we're next to each other for the next cross country, we're going to do all these. And when I'm sitting next to you, I can explain you how that works better, right? But the point is, you always have to remember this formula. And this formula says, and it's going to be in the nav log, is that your true course, right? Plus or less the wind component with angle, with correction angle is going to be your true heading. And we did that, right? In the case of our route on the 058, we know that was because of wind, we need to correct like 6 degrees, that gives us the 64 true heading, but then we need to subtract or add the magnetic deviation or variation. We know that because we're in Texas, in that side of Texas, it's around 3 degrees. So we have 64, we subtract the 3 degrees, it gives us at 61. And then we need to subtract or add the magnetic deviation from the compass because the compass is so subject to errors, and then that will give us our course heading. So in this case, we got 61, and based on this compass car, we know it was around 1 degree, and then we know our course heading is going to be 60. So this is exactly, all this formula here is what it is on the, it is what it is on our nav log, okay? In our nav log here, okay? So that's exactly what we did. And since this is the same heading, I mean, route, of course, and we have the same wind, and we're using the same ground speed, we literally can do the same math, right, for the rest, correct? All right, this one is going to follow the same mechanic, but look at here. Let's do this quickly, go back, because I don't want that you go distracted. So in this, I will use the computer again. So let's do this one to see if we learn. So the heading, the course between McKinney and well, first of all, the wind is coming again, the same wind, right? 160, and we know it's coming from 12 knots, right? So we do this. You see, we always put the number in 100 here, and then in this case it's 12 knots, so it should be somewhere around there. Once that we do that, then we will go into the head in the aircraft is thinking, or course the aircraft is flying. So we knew from our plotter that between McKinney and Farmersville was going to be 090. So now you can see here we have a little bit more of a kind of a left crosswind. but now we need to find what is the impact on the speed, right? So in this case, we said that we're going to fly around 81. That's what we said from the climb. Calibrate airspeed, yes. So true airspeed is going to be 81. So now we're going to move these to 81 somewhere here. Yeah. So as you can see, this is telling us, first of all, now we have a crosswind from the right and we have a headwind. So in this case, we're going to be probably doing 72 for around 76 is going to be the ground speed, right? And then we need to correct, we need to correct 2, 4, 6, 8 degrees to the right. So if we come back to the nav log, let's see what we have. This is exactly what we have, right? For this wind, our true airspeed is 81. We have through course of a correction, wind correction angle of 8, which we need to fly at 97. This is going to be the same, you know, Easterling correction, and that will give us 094. And sorry. And then here is going to give -4. And you're going to say, hey, Manolo, why am I not -4? Well, the reason why this is -4 is because this compass here, when we fly to the 90, you see saying 90 degrees or east, is going to say you should be flying 86. So we need to subtract 4. So, I mean, that hopefully makes, you know, how you do this math. Again, we will do these, with more time when we do our cross country, but I just want to run you through the math first. Okay, so we have filled the majority of the nav log. We understand what heading we need to fly at the end, right? Using the compass and the DG. Now the next thing we need to find out is times. So times is going to be very simple. We can use either the calculator or we can use the um, the manual calculator, the E6B manual calculator. But for this example, I will show you how we use the electronic one, and then I'll show you how we'll do the calculator later. I mean, the manual one later. All right, so let me go back to my iPad. All right, so I think. Okay. So here, what we're going to do is use something called lag time. So for example, we know that the speed on our first leg between true airspeed between Farmersville and true airspeed was 81, and we calculate our ground speed was going to be 76. And we know that the distance was going to be 12 nautical miles. That means that we should do that in 9 minutes and a half, right? So I have calculated this for you guys. So I put 9 here, and then we can do the same math for the rest, right? So 5 and so forth, right? All right, so if we add all these, then we will have a time of 38 minutes in flight, okay? So we are almost there. So the only thing now we need to calculate, we have calculated the time, correction, we have calculated our course heading using true airspeed, wind direction, wind correction angle, magnetic deviation, and compass deviation. And then we also calculate our ground speed. And based on the distance we measure, now we can calculate the distance based on the time based on this ground speed, right? Cool. So the last thing we need to calculate is fuel. And fuel, there's two ways how we're going to do this. We're going to break the climb first because Cessna has a climb table. And then we're going to use the cruise table which is going to be easier for the rest. So this section here is what we're going to call kind of climb. We're going to be a little bit over, but I mean, it's not going to be 100% perfect. We're going to be, climb is going to take a little bit, I think, if I did the math correctly, it's going to be 14 miles instead of 12, but let's leave it like 12. But let me show you how we do that. All right, so fuel. Okay, so fuel is going to be a combination of the taxi fuel, the climb fuel, and route fuel. That will give us a total without reserve. And then we need to have a reserve. Remember, FAR 91-151 establishes what are the reserve we need to have. So if we're flying daytime, we should have at least 30 minutes of reserve. If we're flying nighttime, we should have 45 minutes of reserve for BFR, right? For IFR, different story, but we're not IFR. Okay, so let's start with taxi out. It's very straightforward. If you read the POH, the Cessna 172R POH says that you need to add 1.1 gallon for engine start, taxi, and takeoff allowance. If you want to cross-check what is that on the 172R POH, is on figure 5.7 on the performance section. Now, this is where we are going to use climb. The climb is what I call is a table that you need to subtract the altitude you are less the altitude, the initial altitude. So that's what I put these red boxes here, right? So pressure altitude, again, that's what we calculate the pressure altitude, right? That's what we went through the hassle of calculating on that pressure altitude, right? We are not either a sea level and we're not either 1,000, we're in the middle. And then our cruise altitude, we're not 6,000 and we're not 5,000, we're at 5,500. So there are two ways of doing this. One way is that you become very detailed and do an interpolation. And then the other way is that you say, well, you know what, I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to take 1,000 and I'm going to take 6,000. And then I'm going to do the math between these two. So I have created this quickly in order that you can see how I came to the numbers, but there is one item more that you need to look into. If you read this section here, it says notes. It says that, and that's something that you always have to pay attention on this performance. They always have a bunch of notes. You need to read them because they can affect the performance. Like in the takeoff, for example, they say add 10% if it's not dry and things like that. So you need to read these notes in order to be sure that you're applying and calculating your performance correctly. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if the note says increase time, fuel, and distance by 10% for each 10 degrees above standard temperature. Okay. So how that applies to us? Well, let's do the math. So I create one table here for the interpolated solution, meaning I kind of interpolated these values here to find something at 500 feet and to find the values of time, fuel, and distance at 5,500. And kind of, you see, I said time is going to be 1 minute, gallons is going to be 0.2, which is kind of half between these two, and distance is going to be 1 mile, which is kind of the middle of these two, right? For the 5,500, I did something similar. I said, well, this is 10, and A, is going to be 9. This is 2.1, 1.8, half is going to be this 195, and then 11 and 14, half is going to be 12.5. So how Cessna calculate this is that in order to calculate the fuel burn incline, you need to subtract the cruise altitude less the starting altitude, right? So that's what we did here. We subtract 8 minus 1, it gave us 8 minutes. We subtract 1.95 gallons less 0.2 gallons, it gave us 1.75. And then we subtract 12.5 nautical miles less 1, it gives us 1.5. That would be nice only if we were at a standard temperature, which, remember, standard temperature is being reduced. I think is 2 degrees for every 1,000 feet. So we are definitely not at standard temperature, because in our weather briefing, they told us that McKinney was at 33 degrees, 33 degrees. So that's so far from a standard, because we're only like 500 feet above sea level. Shouldn't be 33. So how we do this adjustment? Well, you see, McKinney at 500 feet, it should be around 14 degrees standard. So we have 33 less 14, we're 19 degrees above standard. So what we have done is divide 19 divided by 10, multiply by 10, that give us that we need to increase this for by 19%, all these numbers by 19%. I simply use a 1.19 factor, apply this to this, and these are the numbers I get. Okay, cool. Now, just to tell you what I have done here, I say forget about interpolating how different it is. So I did, you see, 6 and 1,000, and then we get these, these numbers are very similar. So at the end of the day, it's going to take us around 14 miles to climb, 2 gallons, and time is going to be somewhere between 10 and 11. We can call it 11. So once I calculate these, right, I come back to my nav log and I will plug that on my first point, because it's very close to Farmsby, right? I mean, if you want to get more picky, and we can go that way too, we can create Farmsville, and then we can create a top of climb checkpoint too as well. I mean, but they're like 2 miles apart. So I decide to use it the same, right? So how I put that? Well, let's go and see. So here, right, I put my fuel. I said it's going to be 1 point gallons, right? And then that's it. Okay, and you see it's going to be like 11 minutes, 9 minutes, but let's leave it 9. I mean, it's going to be a little bit different here. Okay, that gives us kind of how we calculate climb. Now the second question is how we calculate cruise. Okay, for that, we go again to our POH, and then there is a cruise table. There it is. So I told you that our speed, right, was going to be, well, first of all, we're way standards, right? We're going to be 19 degrees, and at 4,000, 6,000, it should be is super high. So what I have done is use this 20 degree above standard, how do you call, column, and then I look for my tour speed. So my tour speed is going to be 110 knots, right? Which will imply that I'm going to consume 7.6. But now this is a catch. Look, this is a 4,000. Then I'm going to be flying at 5,500. So let's see what 6,000 said. 6,000 said that 109, which is very close to my 110, same 2,200 RPM, I'm going to be burning 7.3. So I say, well, this is kind of, let's meet on the middle. It could be 4, 5, and 6. Let's call it 7.5. So what I have done is then come with a calculation of 7.5 gallons per hour. And now, if you go back to your nav log, we go back to our nav log, we can calculate how much that it is, right? So we already calculate our climb, but here we're going to be a cruise, and it's going to take 5 minutes. So there are 2 ways to do that, right? One way, you can do it using, again, our E6 weeks manual, but for the arguments today, I'm going to use the iPad one, which is going to be very similar to this, which is the one that you can bring to the test, right? So Yeah, some instructors are going to tell you how to do the round one. I will teach you as well later. But for these lessons, let's use electronic. So what I'm going to do here is show you quickly how to look like, do that. So we know that the distance between Farmersville and Celeste is going to be 10 miles. And based on our ground speed, it's going to be 5 minutes. I will tell you how we did that. So let me show that quickly. Okay, so the first thing we need to calculate is leg time. So we know between Farmersville and Celeste, or Celeste, whatever, it's going to be 11 miles, right? And then we said that our ground speed, and you're not seeing what I'm doing. There it is. And I told you that our ground speed is going to be, we said 111, right? So it's, sorry, 10 miles, and it's going to be 111. So as you can see, that's 5 minutes. That 5 minutes, correct? Now we can calculate our fuel burn. So in this case, right, we know our fuel required, we know the time, and we know it's going to be 7.5 gallons per hour. We're going to consume around 0.7 gallons. So we're going to do this math for every leg on cruise, correct? So when I do that, then the result of all these is going to be this logbook saying, here it is, right? Then I do the math for this, do the math for this, then I do the math for this and so forth, and then this and this. So now we can say, because now we have en route, climb and all the route, we can say how much we can do. So en route is going to take 5.7 gallons, right? Then taxi out is going to be, correction, 1.1 is going to be taxi out, and route is going to be 3.6, and then 2.1 is going to be climb. So we'll require 6.8, let's call it 7. But that doesn't include reserve. So reserve have to be at least for day, half an hour. So we can use 7.5 gallons per hour multiplied by 0.5. It's going to give us 3.8. So we will require 10.6, let's call it 11 gallons to make this flight legal. If we fly with less than 11 gallons, will be illegal, right? So let me say that I have the fuel load on this aircraft, 53 gallons, then you can calculate how much fuel remaining you have in every leg, and you should be able to kind of cross-check that with your fuel indicators, right? So hopefully when you land in Paris, if you top it off to 53, you should land with 46.2 gallons, okay? Any questions on this? I know it's a lot of information, but we will get it. I mean, we'll do another one, and we'll do a lot of exercises with the manual one too. Okay. Okay. So to recap on that, let me recap. Let me show again the entire thing. So first of all, we will choose the waypoint based on things that include safety. It can include like alternates, includes visual points. We don't want to fly a straight line, and we can all see if we're getting lost or not, right? So we choose our point. In this case, I made a first leg between McKinney and Farmsville, and then a straight line from Farmsville to Paris, and then I select visual points And then this is what I wrote. Then after that, I measure the course, right? So using the plotter, and then I measure the distance between each point and fill my logbook. Once that we did that, then the second point is we need to calculate the true air speed. But in order to calculate the true airspeed, we need to have the pressure altitude, and that's going to become handy also for our performance. So we went through the hustle of calculating pressure altitude for takeoff, and we did the pressure altitude for cruise. Once that we have the pressure altitude for cruise, then we can calculate our estimated true airspeed, and that's what we did using the calculator or the EXE manual. And then once that we have the true airspeed, and we plot the winds we got from the briefing, now we can calculate our wind correction angle, and we can calculate our ground speed. And that's what we did for every segment. So in this case, we did 160, 12, 160 and 12 was a wind, temperature was 19. With that information, we calculate our true airspeed. With that, then we calculate our wind correction angle 6, and then we add that to our initial course. And at the same time, we got our ground speed. Then ground speed we use later, right? Okay, so let me keep on the logic. Then we add our east or west deviation to that number, and then we correct it by the compass deviation card on the airplane. We got our final course heading. Once that's done, and we already calculate our ground speed, then we can calculate the time, correct, for every leg, and we total that. And then if we have the time, we have our pressure, altitude, our true airspeed, then we can calculate our fuel consumption. We use a table for Cessna to do that. That gives us 7.5 per gallons per hour. And then we apply the time that it took us to do that 10 miles at this ground speed, multiply that time by the gallons per hour, then give us how much was going to be the consumption. And that will be it. Okay, all right, so that's enough log. So now what is going to happen, and then we will cover a couple of things later. What will happen now? We're going to start flying, right? So the first thing we need to do when we fly is take the time we take off, and then we will put an estimate time here. Well, actually, I need to kind of fix this. So yeah, I need to fix this logbook because what we should be able to have is another one called ETA here. And I will do one that says ETA and actual time of arrival. So let's say we took off at, if we took off at 12, right? We should be able to say, okay, we should be over Farnsville at 12:09. And then we should be over the be in Farnsville at 12:14 and so forth, right? We should be around Celeste 12:19, and we should be around Ladonia and so forth, right? And then we should be around right. So we should be landing Paris at 12:38. So as soon as we take off, we can calculate this. But what is going to happen in reality is that now, let's say it took us now 10 minutes. Let's say 10 minutes. So in reality now, what is going to happen is now we need to adjust this. Okay, so actual was 12:10. So what is going to happen is, well, I can calculate now if I have a lower ground speed, right? Because maybe I'm having a ground speed of 100 or whatever, 105. And then based on that, then I can recalculate or estimate my other waypoints, right? So this is what we will do once that we're on the airplane. we will start filling these and recalculating these points, right? Based on our takeoff time here. All right, cool, very cool. All right. Well, it gives us, we have like 15 more minutes to go and then we'll finish this lesson. It's been long, I know it's kind of crazy the first time. Any feedback will be appreciated. Okay. So the other thing is that we need to cover, let me see if I miss anything. We cover reserve. We covered that we need to do the black line, look alternate, okay. One thing I want to tell you, as you select your waypoints, let me share the iPad again. Why this thing disappear, man? I don't know. Okay. And one thing I just want to highlight, as you plan your route, just be aware of all, I mean, one thing that you need to also take into consideration is you have enough alternates, right? So as we plan, right, um, you should be able to have alternates, right? Like for example, here we'll have, you know, either private runways all around the place, or we have other airports around our route, right? So, um, so it's a good practice to identify them and memorize them in case that you have a diversion, right? Here also look for, you know, big lakes and things like that. We don't have any here, but sometimes you might want to avoid them because, I mean, if it's a large lake, you might need to change the route based on that because maybe you don't want to be flying in the middle of lake, you have an engine failure. And then also you need to be looking for a lake in case of you have an emergency. Maybe it's better to land in a lake than a forest or a mountain. So you need to kind of, you know, mentalize and, you know, understand all the things in this chart. Like for example, you know, here it's going to be 1500. So you know, you should be probably planning altitudes based on these obstacles, minimum altitudes and things like that. The idea of this is that we always have to be prepared that if we have an emergency, we know, or we at least are mentalized of the options we have. Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. The other thing I want to cover after we cover the flight planning is importance of weather and go no go decisions. Is very important. We have to get in the habit of calling this briefer. I do it up to this day. That's a resource you have. We need to use the briefer, and that doesn't mean that you can use the tools to self-brief, but it's good to call and get their opinion on that, right? So we typically in the briefing, we will indicate for a standard briefing, the aircraft type, our destination, registration, aircraft type, origin, destination, departure, altitude, and time. And then we'll request, you know, we can tell them, hey, we're going to go for practice and we'll be in route 2 hours, whatever. And then they give us a brief, right? It's very important. And then remember that we have by FAA, you, they expect that you do your due diligence, and that's in 91-103. They want you to, for every of your flights, you get familiar with all the information, including runway length of intended takeoff and use, and we're going to go over that in a second. And then it's a good practice to get into the briefing, as I said, right? Then remember, we have different type of briefing. We're going to have a standard briefing. They will give you the entire thing in the standard briefing. They can give you an abbreviated briefing. That one is where you request specific information. How I use the abbreviated briefing is, for example, if I have done a self-brief myself, I understand that whether it's going to be good, but there is a couple of things that I have a concern, then I call and I request for an abbreviated briefing. Or it could be that I got a standard briefing earlier and I just want to see if things have changed, and then I ask for the specific of the items that I think or I'm concerned. Then you have an Outlook briefing. That's probably the one that you will use. Let's say we're planning for tomorrow, a flight for tomorrow, and you want to see how things are looking, right? And then you give a call, and then they will give you an Outlook briefing. Now, be aware that the Outlook briefing is um, uh, an Outlook briefing is every briefing that is greater than 6 hours from departure. So you might be called, let's say you're departing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're calling at 8 a.m., that might qualify as an Outlook briefing. And then last but not least, remember, you always can call the flight station and request for a flight briefing. And see, we have one here. Well, there is no flight briefing on the VOR, but we can find information on the, how do you call, on the AFD, right? So how we do that, and that's a good segue for, so let me show you here how you do that. So how the supplemental chart, or called AFD before, it will look like this, right? So here is where we come and learn all the details about the airport. As part of the briefing, typically I do the briefing, I review all the runway, I also even try to understand what taxi route we're going to get, and I calculate my performance, takeoff, and weight and balance. I will do that all the time. Um, at least that is so evident that I don't have to calculate weight and balance because it's myself and it's a flight, I don't have anything. But if it's a flight of two or three people in the Cessna, definitely I always do that. So here you see we will have the runway length. In this case, is 7,000. 7,002. We know it's concrete runway. Um, our it has high intensity runway lights. Then it tells us all the things that you have a PAPI and you have approach lights. They tell you that the glide slope is around 3 degrees. Also, the touchdown zone here is 50 degrees and so forth. Tells if it has fuel or not, and then it tells you whether remarks and so forth. And then this section here tells you about communications. A very important one, you see this airport is class D while the tower is on working, but the tower is not working all the time, right? So at 10 o'clock, the tower will close local, and then it will go into class G. And then typically they tell you, some nav aid information and ILS. So for Paris, something similar. It has to be, we need to do that as well to review it, to be familiar, and also to expect what to do, right? Like, for example, the wind today was coming from the south. Well, what better runway to use? Maybe we use runway 14 because the wind was coming 150. So let's see if that runway is appropriate for us. So again, we can go to the AFD here, but I will show you how to do it on the normal paper, but I don't have it with me digitally now. Again, same information, Paris. You see, we want to use this runway 4,000 feet, runway 14. It tells you what type of fuel they have, the runway. So if we want to runway 14, is 4,624. by 150 and it's concrete. And then they have airport remarks and so forth. So you need to get familiarized with these. And typically what I do is I have my flight log, nav log with all the information relevant to that, like runway, length, and all that, right? All right, any questions on this? All right, on the go, no go decision. Okay, in the go, no go decision, we need to use our ADM skill set, right? So we need to use our ADM skill set and we need to use our PAVE and unsafe. If you don't feel good, then just then use your unsafe checklist to see if it's worth it. And if you're good physically and fit, then use the PAVE to see if if you are okay. I mean, there is anything with the pilot. That's why you use safe. I'm safe. Is the aircraft correct? Is the environment? Is the. So be sure that you have enough margins. Be sure also that, like, for example, altitude is enough. They give you some time to glide in. All that things you need to look into, right? If you, for example, haven't flown lately, maybe it's good to bring somebody with more experience. Or if you have a new equipment, well, maybe bring somebody that knows how to do the equipment, or practice before. Try to identify, what risk you're going to have in the flight and put ways to mitigate that risk, right? So it's all about that. You don't want to be, you know, uh, if you, the other thing, if you have your personal limits and you this fly is very close to the personal limits, maybe it's time to let it pass, right? So, um, and then weather, as I said, is going to be important for that, right? Okay, so flight plans. For BFR, we can we can file a flight plan. That's good for the purposes that if we don't arrive to destination, they can initiate a rescue mission. But that's about part two, because if you forget to close the flight plan, then they're going to be looking for you. So they're not mandatory, as I said, they're recommended. You can open it with three ways. You can call the FSS, you can use the FSS or Fly Watch and the Fly Briefing application, or you can use any of the electronic applications like for Fly, and then here you come here, like, and then proceed to file, and that's it. In this case, I will do VFR, and then he will request information, you will file. And then typically when you take off, then you need to call the flight station and activate it. I need to check quickly if you can activate it before taking off for flight. I'm 99% sure, but I don't want to do it. Let me review that and get back to you. But if you are on the airplane, then you can activate it, call in flight station, and then you can activate it when you land. That does tie me back again to the other thing I want to show, that I've kind of switched gears on you guys. When you go to, for example, McKinney, then on the frequencies here, you see you will have flight services. That's a frequency you can use, right? So 122.3. So when you call them and say forward radio 733 November Bravo, we are X miles out of McKinney, requesting to open my flight, my VFR flight plan. They're going to tell you da. Or if you are requesting an in-flight briefing, they will say, hey, requesting a briefing on weather, and they're going to tell you, right? And remember to close the flight plan. You can call when you land, or you can call before you land if you have the fill inside. And you also, I believe, let me double check that you can close it with the application. Okay, diversion. Okay, so for diversion, the procedure is going to be, let's say here, right? So let's say we're flying along, and then for some reason, I don't know, let's say, we have identified all these airports and we're flying here, around here right now. somewhere in this area. Let me clear all this. Let's assume that we're flying around here, and then guess what? I think we have a potential problem, or the passenger gets sick. So the first thing is you always should be oriented, and from your planning, you should know directionally where the airports are. So without too much hesitation, right? You should know that if you turn, like if you want to deviate to commerce, you might need to do like a heading of, probably 120, and turn to the heading first. And then if you have time, then start using the plotter and the sectional chart to plot that course and directionally get there, right? Um, you always should know where you are, right? I mean, at the beginning, you might not be using the geofencing or geopositioning, but if you're using your charts and you're being cross-checking the points, you should know that, oh, I passed Celeste, we're very close to Wall City. Oh, Wall City is there. You know that if you need to deviate, you can turn to Commerce, right, to the right. Um, so right when you do that, write down the time and the heading, and then you use the plotter to that. And the good thing about for fly is that you can do that very quickly, right? So you can say, hey, it's 9 miles and my heading is 101, right? That's the beauty about this. And then as you divert, then you can refine your heading, use nav aids and things like that until you get to the airport, right? And then calculate, ground speed and so forth. The good thing about this is this application is already telling us, right? I'm flying a Cessna 172R, and it's telling me that at 120 knots, I should be there in nine nautical, in 4 minutes, 1 gallon, and all that. So this is helping me a lot for diversions. Okay, but you should be able to do it with a plotter as well, right? So it's going to be very simple. You can measure the distance at 10 miles. You can calculate 10 miles is going to be probably another 7 minutes. It's going to be probably 0.7 gallons, right? And it's going to be 1 gallon. So that's kind of how they're doing it. But you can use your plotter and sectional chart. Okay, so first thing, if you're lost, there are ways to, there's one thing that can happen. I have never got lost, but there are ways to avoid that you get lost. So the first one is you always should know, again, if you're actively doing your deck reckoning and doing pilotage to cross-check your position, you should be fairly sure where you are, right? And then to always be sure to what you expect next. That's what I was telling you. If I know I flew over Farmville and I keep flying, I will see, oh, there is this Fly Sky airport here. Oh, look, it should be the railroad over there. There is the antenna. So just always keep looking outside that to know where you are. And then look, if you cannot look at the visual, or for some reason you lost visual reference for, or it's like a place where there is nothing, it's all like fields and fields, well, then you can use the nav aid, right? So you can use the Paris VOR, and worst case scenario, you will fly to it. We're going to have a lesson before we do all the cross country and dual cross country and your solo cross country, where you're going to learn how to use this nav aid, both the GPS and the VOR. Well, what you should happen when you get lost? Well, first of all, don't panic. The good thing, if you're flying around here, there is a lot of flat land. Just be sure that you are not low. That's good. Yeah, that and then typically you're not in a marginal weather condition. We're going to preclude to do that as well, right? On your for your training. But for your, when you're a pilot, you should be able to remember. You hypothetically, if you do your ADM correctly, you shouldn't get into a position where you're going to get into marginal weather. I mean, if you got there, we're in a bad situation. So in that case, probably the best course of action is to, to probably go back and do a 180 where the visibility was good. Also try to head to, let's say, to the first area that you see that there is a lot of landmarks, and then try to identify them with the map, with the section, right? Okay, feel free to see if you can contact ATC. If you're close to, an airport, call them, or you can look at the frequencies on the sectional chart, for example, here, right? So you can contact regional departure and hey, say, hey, we think we're lost. I'm a student pilot. I would require vectors or a vector to, to, I don't know, back to McKinney or whatever, right? If you feel like you're no confident, then land, divert very quickly. I mean, and then in the ground, you can regroup, you can call me if you're in your solo, or you can call the briefer after you get your rating, and so forth, right? And always use what we call the 5C, which is climb, communicate, talk to the ATC, and confess, tell the ATC, hey, look, we're lost. Or if you got into BMC and then you're above the clouds and you cannot back, your visual on top, I mean, just say, hey, this is what happened, blah, blah, and then comply with the instruction of ATC, and then conserve. And what that means is you need to reduce power in order to reduce fuel burn, in order that you can have more time to make better decisions, right? Now, quite honestly, there is a high probability that you get lost today with all the technology. And I think one thing that is more of a concern, and it has been happening since we have been putting more and more technology on the aircraft, is that people lost situational awareness. And with situational awareness, then bad things can happen because you can do control fly into terrain, or you can get hit an antenna because you were looking and playing with the GPS, or you can hit a mountain like happened with the 757 of American because they were like bad design on the database. A bunch of things happened on a rush trying to use the technology. If you get a new piece of equipment, don't try to do a fly where you're pressured to do that, right? So do a fly where you don't have any pressure to use new technology, because it's a bad operational or safety practice to try to do a fly where you have a new piece of equipment, and there is high probability that you don't want to be learning that on the airplane, right? That's my point. Learn it before you get to the fly. So hopefully, I mean, this lesson was useful for you. I know it's kind of complicated a little bit. I might review it again and see what areas I can improve. But flight planning is fun. You will enjoy when you get to the waypoint at the time you said you were going to head there, and it's exciting. And as I said, this is going to be the principle of all the other type of navigations if you decide to use your IFR, because I mean, the only difference, instead of using, your plots that you track, now you're going to be following nav aids in small segments or routes using the GPS, or a small segment using the GPS. But it's the same concept, and you need to be, I mean, this is a great foundation. So again, very important, your planning is going to be a key component of your go, no go decision. Remember to check weather, remember to look for diversions also in your plan, put buffers, look for alternates in your route. Just mentalize that things can go wrong and that you have all these choices there. And then last but not least, remember to use your ADM resources and things like your PAVE and your unsafe list, right? As a pilot in command, you will be responsible to making all these decisions and to taking due and you pass passengers safely from point A to point B. It's fun and it's awesome. So take this responsibility seriously. I'll see you soon. We'll send homework for the next lesson soon, and any feedback will be appreciated. Thanks, and talk to you soon. Bye.